When a street teenager shouted, "Don't eat that!" no one could have predicted what would happen next. The Imperial restaurant was a favorite haunt of Moscow's elite. Nestled in the heart of the capital, not far from the Kremlin, it exuded luxury. Marble columns, grand crystal chandeliers, and the soft glow of wall sconces reflecting off pristine white tablecloths. Through the panoramic windows, an evening Moscow unfolded, its endless stream of cars glimmering in the reflections on wet asphalt. It was midday, and the restaurant was alive with its usual rhythm. Waiters in impeccably tailored suits silently glided between tables, serving gourmet dishes and exquisite wines. The air mingled with the scents of freshly baked bread, expensive coffee, and French perfumes. Yet one man, seated at the central table, seemed oblivious to all this. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, a name known throughout the country, a man who had spent his life climbing to the top, starting as a simple fellow who practiced judo with earnest dedication from the age of 11, and eventually reaching the highest echelons of power. At 23, he began his career in the KGB, quickly establishing himself as a perceptive and calculating operative. In the 90s, he became the assistant to the rector of a university in charge of international relations, and later an advisor to the mayor of St. Petersburg. In just 3 years, Putin ascended from deputy manager in presidential affairs to secretary of the Security Council. At 72, he looked every bit the man accustomed to power and self-control. With a poised posture, a confident gaze, and a cool yet attentive demeanor, he was dressed in a flawlessly tailored Italian suit, sporting a Patek Philippe watch and expensive cufflinks. He sat by the window, silently studying the menu, though it seemed his thoughts were far away. Nearby, by the wrought iron fence of the summer terrace, stood a teenager. He appeared to be 14, his slender figure swathed in an oversized puffy jacket, notably too large for him, with dark strands of hair peeking out beneath the hood. His eyes were sharp and watchful, ever attentive to the smallest details: who was preoccupied, who had forgotten their wallet, who left a half-eaten piece of bread on their plate. His name was Michael. No one in this restaurant knew his name. Putin glanced at his watch, Swiss, expensive, then returned his gaze to the menu. At that moment, a waiter set a steaming bowl of creamy soup and a fresh, crusty baguette before him. But something was wrong. Michael noticed movement, a slight, almost imperceptible motion. A woman's hand, adorned with a delicate gold bracelet, reached for her bag. In one smooth motion, she pulled out a small vial. With a swift, practiced gesture, she emptied its contents into the soup, mixing it seamlessly into the steaming broth. Michael froze. His heart raced faster. This was strange. Coincidence? A mistake? Or... Vladimir Vladimirovich picked up his spoon. And in that instant, Michael found himself moving forward, his legs carrying him toward the table without a second thought. He rushed across the terrace, not considering the consequences, and shouted, "Don't eat that!" The restaurant went silent. Conversations at surrounding tables stopped. The waiters halted, one dropping a fork. The sound of glass shattering echoed. All gazes turned toward the teenager who dared to disrupt the flawless atmosphere of this elite establishment. At his table, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin slowly lifted his eyes. The spoon with the soup hung suspended in the air, his gaze calm yet piercing. "What did you say?" His voice was even, but edged with steel. Michael swallowed, but didn't avert his gaze. I saw..." He drew in a deep breath. "She put something in your soup." At the table with Putin sat a woman in her 40s, elegant, composed, her hair perfectly styled. Her face remained calm, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "What nonsense is this?" she snapped, pushing her chair back. "This boy is just a homeless thief. He wants money." but Putin's gaze stayed locked on the teenager. "Are you sure?" His voice was slow but firm. Michael nodded. "I saw it with my own eyes. She took a vial, dropped something into the soup, and then stirred it." Whispers spread through the restaurant. People exchanged glances, some muttering, and the tension in the air grew thicker. Putin placed the spoon down and picked up the bowl. He brought it closer to his face and carefully sniffed it. Cream, spices, and something foreign. Slowly, he lowered the bowl. "Lena, explain yourself." The woman across from him tensed. Panic flashed in her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. "You don't think—" she stammered. "Vova, this is absurd." Her voice trembled. But at that moment, a waitress, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "I saw it too. She poured something in." Panic flared in the woman's eyes. "Are you all crazy? This is a setup." She leapt to her feet, but Putin instantly reached out, grabbing her wrist. "You're not going anywhere." In the distance, the wail of sirens could be heard. The restaurant doors flung open, and 2 officers in uniform entered. "We've been notified of a possible poisoning," one of them announced loudly. Lena turned pale. "This is a mistake." Her voice was sharp, desperate. The officers exchanged glances. One of them carefully took the bowl from Putin's hands, wearing gloves. "We'll check it." Lena glared at Putin, her eyes wild. "You trust them more than me?" He looked at her quietly, his gaze unwavering. "Yes." The woman was escorted out. Putin leaned back in his chair, staring into space. Then he turned his gaze to the teenager. "What's your name?" "Michael." "You saved my life." The boy averted his gaze. "I just couldn't stay silent." Putin looked at him intently. "Where do you live?" Michael shrugged. Putin took out his phone, typed something. "You'll have a home now." Michael couldn't believe his ears. But for the first time in many years, he felt hope. Nearby, by the wrought iron railing of the summer veranda, a teenager stood. He looked to be about 14. A thin figure in a worn, puffer jacket that was clearly too big for him, with dark strands of hair peeking out from under his hood. His eyes were sharp, keen, and observant. He had long mastered the art of noticing the little details. Who was busy with what? Who had forgotten their wallet? Who had left an unfinished piece of bread on their plate? His name was Michael. No one in this restaurant knew his name. Putin glanced at his Swiss, expensive watch, then returned his attention to the menu. At that moment, a hush fell over the restaurant. Voices at neighboring tables died away. Waiters halted. Someone dropped a fork, and the clink of glass echoed. Every eye turned toward the teenager who had dared to disrupt the impeccable atmosphere of the elite restaurant. At his table, Vladimir Vladimirovich slowly raised his eyes. The spoon, still suspended in mid-air with soup, underscored the gravity of the moment, his gaze calm yet piercing. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone steady but edged with steel. Michael swallowed but did not look away. I saw," he managed, taking a deep breath. "She added something to your soup." Across from him sat a woman of about 40, neat, elegant, her hair styled flawlessly. Her face remained impassive, yet a flicker of worry crossed her eyes. "What nonsense is this?" she snapped, pushing her chair back. "This kid is nothing but a homeless thief. He wants money." But Putin did not divert his gaze from the teenager. "Are you sure?" he inquired, his voice measured yet insistent. Michael nodded. "I saw it with my own eyes. She pulled out a vial, dropped something into the soup, and then stirred it." Murmurs began to ripple through the restaurant. People exchanged glances, whispered among themselves, and the tension in the room mounted. Putin set his spoon aside and picked up the bowl. Bringing it closer to his face, he cautiously inhaled its scent. Cream, spices, and something foreign. He slowly set the bowl down. "Elena, explain yourself," he commanded. The woman across from him stiffened. A flash of panic crossed her features, but she quickly regained composure. "You don't really think— Volodya, this is absurd!" Her voice trembled. At that moment, a nearby waitress stepped forward. "I saw it too. She poured something in," she declared. Panic ignited in Elena's eyes. "You're all out of your minds! This is a setup!" she cried, leaping to her feet. But Putin swiftly reached out and grasped her wrist. "You're not going anywhere!" Just then, the wail of sirens sounded in the distance. The restaurant doors burst open as two uniformed men entered. "We have received a report of a possible poisoning," one of them announced loudly. Elena paled. "This is a mistake," she insisted, her voice sharp and desperate. The officers exchanged looks. One of them put on gloves and carefully lifted the bowl of soup. "We'll investigate," he stated. Elena shot a wild look at Putin. "You trust them more than you trust me?" she demanded. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. "Yes," he replied. The woman was led away. Putin leaned back in his chair, staring into the void. Then he turned his gaze to the teenager. "What's your name?" "Michael," the boy answered. "You saved my life." Michael looked away. "I just couldn't stay silent." Putin studied him intently. "Where do you live?" Michael shrugged. Putin took out his phone and dialed. "Now you'll have a home." Michael could hardly believe his ears, yet for the first time in many years, hope stirred within him. He sat there, unsure of what to do. The restaurant gradually resumed its usual rhythm, yet the air remained charged with tension. People whispered, waiters exchanged looks. Some patrons left, while others furtively tried to snap photos. Vladimir Vladimirovich regarded the teenager as if seeing him truly for the first time. "Are you alone?" he asked. Michael nodded silently. "Where do you live?" Michael shrugged once more. "Wherever I have to." Putin pondered. In all his years, he had seen many people, but there was something exceptional about this boy. "I've called a car. It will take you to a safe place. There you'll be fed and given clothes. We'll see what comes next." Michael tensed. "I'm not asking for anything in return," Putin continued. "You've already done more than many could." The boy hesitated, but when a black Mercedes appeared through the glass doors of the restaurant, he suddenly realized he had nothing to lose. They left the restaurant together. At the entrance, a security guard stood by as the driver opened the door. Michael climbed into the car and glanced around. Leather seats, subdued lighting, perfect silence. Putin sat down beside him. "Where are we going?" Michael asked. "Home," Putin replied calmly. "To you?" the boy asked in disbelief. "Now, to you as well." For the first time in his life, Michael was being driven to a place where he was truly expected. The car glided through the night in Moscow. Beyond the tinted windows, city lights, buildings, and neon advertisements flashed by. Yet inside the cabin, there was profound silence. Michael sat, gripping his seatbelt tightly. Everything seemed unreal. He had just saved one of the most influential men in the country, and now he was in his car, heading somewhere unknown. Putin gazed out the window, his expression unruffled. "Why did you do that?" he suddenly asked. Michael frowned. "What did I do?" "You warned me," the boy shrugged. "I just couldn't stay silent." "Most would have," Putin remarked. Michael said nothing. After 20 minutes, the car turned off a busy highway and entered through massive wrought iron gates. Beyond lay a spacious inner courtyard paved with cobblestones. A lit pathway led to a massive 3-story mansion with imposing columns and panoramic windows. "Do you live here?" Michael breathed out, hardly able to contain his awe. "Now you do too," Putin replied curtly. The guard opened the door. "Welcome, Vladimir Vladimirovich." Putin nodded and stepped out of the car. Michael hesitated. "Are you with me?" Putin called over his shoulder. Michael clenched his fists, understanding that if he left now, there would be no turning back. He stepped out. Inside, the house resembled a museum. High ceilings, marble floors, grand chandeliers, and paintings adorning the walls. The air carried the scent of wood and expensive cigars. Putin walked ahead, gesturing for Michael to follow him. "Here, you're safe. You'll be given a room, clothes, food." "And what then?" Michael asked cautiously. Putin stopped and turned toward him. "Then you decide for yourself. But I believe you have potential." Michael frowned. "Potential for what?" Putin smirked. "For anything." At that moment, a man in a sharp suit emerged from a distant corridor. "Vladimir Vladimirovich, they are waiting for you in the office." "Very well," Putin replied. He looked at Michael once more. "Rest for now. We'll talk tomorrow." Turning, he left. Michael stood alone in the vast hall, uncertain of what to do. He had no idea, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that he had finally found the right place. Later, Michael sat on a soft bed in his new room, still in disbelief. He had never slept in such a place. A spacious bedroom with wooden furniture and a huge window overlooking the nighttime Moscow. It was warm, quiet, and unfamiliar. On the bedside table, a plate of hot food awaited him. "Eat. You need to gather your strength," came the gentle command. Michael looked up to see a man in a black turtleneck and tailored trousers standing in the doorway, one of Putin's men. "My name is Dmitri. You can call me Dim. I've been here a long time," he said. Michael nodded silently. "Get used to it. No one here does anything for free. If you're given something, it means they expect something in return." The teenager frowned. "And what do they expect from me?" Dmitri smiled. "That's what we'll find out. Tomorrow you have a meeting with Vladimir Vladimirovich. He'll tell you everything." With that, he turned and left Michael alone with his thoughts. In the morning, Michael was awoken by a knock on the door. "Time to get up. Breakfast is in 10 minutes, then we're heading to the office." He quickly washed up and donned a clean shirt and trousers. The new clothes felt strange, yet comfortable. On the ground floor, in the living room, Putin was already waiting. Seated in a leather armchair, he calmly leafed through documents. "Sit down," he instructed. Michael sat opposite him. Putin studied him carefully. "You're smart. You know how to observe. You're not afraid to speak the truth, even when it's dangerous. I value that." The boy remained silent. "But the world isn't such that a hero is rewarded simply for one act. You need to understand how to use what you have." Michael frowned. "What do you want from me?" Putin smirked. "I'm giving you a chance. The choice is yours. You can stay here, study, and become someone, or you can go back to where you were." Michael tensed. "You want to teach me something?" "I want to give you an opportunity. How you make use of it is entirely up to you." Michael thought for a moment. He remembered the streets, the cold nights, the endless struggle for food, and he realized that he would never go back. He looked up at Putin. "All right, what will you teach me?" Putin smiled. "We'll start with discipline. Dmitri will take care of you." At that moment, Dmitri entered the room and gave a brief nod. "Welcome to your new life, kid." Michael understood. From that moment on, everything would change. From that day forward, Michael began his new life. Every morning started at 6 a.m. Physical training, studying foreign languages, honing analytical thinking. Dmitri was strict yet fair. He offered no leniency, but he never demanded the impossible. "You catch on quickly," Dmitri once said, "but the main thing is to learn to think ahead. That is your greatest weapon." Michael listened, absorbing every word. He understood that this wasn't merely training. It was preparation for something greater. One day, Putin summoned him to his office. "Are you ready for your first assignment?" Michael froze, but nodded. "Learn to notice the details. This time you don't have to intervene. Just observe. Find out who among my people is working for both sides." Michael was taken aback. "How am I supposed to do that?" "You already know. Just watch carefully. People always give themselves away." It was a test. For a week, Michael observed. He listened to conversations, noted who seemed nervous, who avoided eye contact, who talked too much. And one day, he understood. One of the bodyguards frequently stepped away to take calls, appeared tense, and sometimes even avoided meeting Putin's gaze. Michael reported this to Dmitri. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." By the next day, that bodyguard was no longer in the house. Michael realized his words now carried weight in this world. After several weeks, Putin summoned him once again. "You handled it well. Good job." "What now?" Michael asked. Putin regarded him intently. "Now, you decide where to go next. I can offer you all the opportunities, but what you do with them is entirely up to you." Michael pondered. He remembered the streets, hunger, the fear of tomorrow, and now he had a chance. "I'll stay," he declared. Putin nodded. "You made the right decision." Michael realized that he would never return to the life he once knew. Now he was building his own destiny, and new challenges lay ahead. But now he knew. He was ready. Today's story shows us how one decisive act can change a life. Michael, an ordinary street teenager, was not afraid to defy the circumstances, and that decision forever altered his destiny. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin saw in him something more than just a street kid. Their fates intertwined, proving that courage and honesty can lead to unexpected, life-altering consequences. What would you have done if you were in Michael's place? Would you have trusted him or kept silent? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, support us. Give a like. It helps the video gain traction. Share this video with your friends. It might inspire someone to take a bold step. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. Your opinion matters. Which moment in this story did you find the most intense? We're waiting for your comments. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next video.